Sometimes, it's the best intentions that compel us to give a second chance, but it's not always used as expected, and that can have fatal consequences. Today, we'll talk about how a second chance cost 2 innocent lives. Oak Bay is a small coastal community in Canada with a population of less than 20,000 people. It's a great place to start a family and raise children, with a close-knit local community, quiet and safe, yet very progressive. On December 25, 2017, Oak Bay was filled with the spirit of Christmas. Colorful lights blinked in all the windows of the apartments along the street, and the houses were decorated. Despite the festive atmosphere, the day was marred for some people by the death of a loved one.
Sarah Cotton had spent her entire life in this town. In 2009, she met a man named Andrew Barry. Both worked for the local ferry service, which provided connections to the mainland and coastal regions. There were a large number of islands between which connections and freight deliveries took place. Sarah had previously completed a degree at the University of Victoria and then trained to get the position. Before that, she had worked in a public relations group. She was active and energetic, successful in every area. After they met, her relationship with Andrew developed very quickly. After a while, it moved to the next level as the couple started a family. They married in 2011. Daughter Chloe was born, and in 2013, Aubrey came into the world. As usual, the beginning of the young couple's relationship was promising. It seemed they were sincerely in love and treated each other with great respect. But everyday life can ruin even such loving couples. After the birth of the children, the relationship deteriorated significantly. Another difficult phase was the tragic death of Andrew's father, who died in a car accident in 2013. Against this backdrop, Andrew's behavior began to change dramatically and became very troubling. The man exploded over trivialities, provoked conflicts during pleasant situations, after which he insulted his wife. As it turned out, Andrew's father had previously kept the young man's bad temper in check, but now their main protector was gone. In this context, Andrew behaved more freely and even aggressively. Initially, the young mother tried to smooth over all conflicts and hide them from others, hoping that all this would simply stop when the difficult time for the family was over. Unfortunately, the situation only worsened. One day, the couple got into a heated argument over child support.
This was the first time Andrew made a threat. If the problem wasn't solved, said the young father, he would be willing to kill the whole family. Such threats frightened Sarah. His outbursts of anger became increasingly uncontrollable, and his behavior more unpredictable and disordered. When the man became angry, he started driving recklessly and caused accidents on the road. At first, Andrew tried to do this without the children present, but later he completely lost control and allowed himself such escapades even when the girls were in the car. It became increasingly clear that this once strong marriage had become a real threat to the lives of Sarah and the girls. They were growing up in a very unfriendly and unsafe environment that now began to threaten their lives. But the woman still tried to save the marriage. Several months passed in this state until Sarah finally reached a breaking point. The young mother decided to end the relationship and bluntly told her husband. She insisted that he move out of the family home that very day. Instead of calmly packing his things and leaving the house, Andrew provoked another argument, after which he broke into his wife's bedroom and began to strangle her. She managed to free herself from his grip, after which Sarah took her mobile phone and called the police. Andrew continued to behave inappropriately until the police officers arrived. His violent behavior was obvious. In light of the threats, the young father was quickly arrested and taken to the station. After this incident, Sarah was able to obtain a restraining order that ensured her ex-husband could not approach the children or herself. It seemed the whole family could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The man was calmed and brought under control. He stopped his harassment and controlled his outbursts of anger. Andrew moved into an apartment where he lived alone. The ex-wife raised their 2 daughters alone and continued to live with them in the family home. The young woman worked tirelessly, including overtime, to provide the little girls with everything they needed. Her parents supported Sarah and took care of the children while their mother went to work. Her then-husband did not support her financially. A divorce took place, and Sarah received full custody of the children. Due to Andrew's aggressive behavior, he was denied the right to see the children, and child support was ordered. Sarah surrounded the girls with love and devoted all her free time to raising the children. This went on for 3 months until her relationship with Andrew changed for the first time. The man apparently missed them and got in touch. Andrew wrote to his wife and asked to see his daughters, but Sarah refused. The man still insisted, but didn't get what he wanted. At this point, he seemed to change, became calmer, and managed, thanks to the help of a lawyer and witnesses, to appeal the court's decision. As a result, the court order was changed so that the young father was allowed to see his girls on weekends. He now had official permission to interact with his children, of whom he was so proud. The woman had to bring her daughters to their father, but she didn't leave them unattended. Under her supervision, Andrew got along well with the girls. Unfortunately, this was the beginning of a true tragedy, but it was still quite far off. Within a few years, problems arose related to child support and joint ownership of the house. The court ordered Andrew to pay a large amount in back child support to support his children. In parallel, there was a proceeding about the division of the joint family home. The young father refused to pay any amounts for the house. As a result, the court offered Sarah to buy her ex-husband's share of the property, which was then worth $60,000, for only $20,000, minus the child support debts. This meant that she would obtain the rights to the property in this way and have no claims for unpaid support. The woman agreed to these terms. However, Andrew was against such a repayment of the debts and tried to contest this decision in court. During this time, the man often took his daughters to spend time with them. According to the court order, he could do this without the mother's presence. Soon, Sarah noticed increasingly troubling signs. One day, when the children returned, she discovered a spot on Aubrey's head that looked like a wound from a blow. She called her ex, who claimed the girl had accidentally bumped herself while playing. But the next time, according to the girl, her father went even further and tried to touch her in intimate places. He labeled the accusation of molestation as absurd, but Sarah believed her daughter. She decided to act immediately and turned to the Child Protection Agency. An investigation was launched, during which the father's contact with his daughters was strictly monitored. Despite the complaints of the daughter and the mother, law enforcement and child protection officers were unable to find evidence of the man's misconduct and intentions. They simply threw up their hands. The father claimed the child had simply fallen and therefore had a scrape on her head. That sounded plausible enough. The touch could not have been malicious. He had supposedly accidentally touched the girl while playing. The woman insisted that Andrew posed a threat to her daughters. He had previously behaved strangely and suspiciously. The daughters didn't want to talk to him, and the mother wanted them to have no contact with him at all and tried to forbid him from seeing the girls. The custody dispute continued in court. At the end of 2016, Sarah again questioned her ex-husband's ability to care for the children. Once, the ex-husband left the youngest daughter alone in a stroller in a public place while he moved quite far away from her. Furthermore, the mother of the children claimed that her husband had repeatedly spoken badly about her in front of the little girls, which she saw as an attempt to turn the girls against her. The trial began. Each side presented their version of events and claims. In the end, nothing changed. The children continued to live with their mother, and the father could take them during holidays and on weekends. The judge who made the ruling believed that Andrew was a loving father who could offer his girls a lot. The judge had no idea what a cruel mistake he had made. The court decided that the young father's aggressive behavior was only temporary and related to domestic problems in the family. Suspected child abuse was not proven, so the man was given another chance. The parties were given conditions they had to strictly adhere to in order to continue interacting with 6-year-old Chloe and 4-year-old Aubrey. The girls were bright and cheerful children with their own personalities and interests. The eldest, Chloe, had managed to get into the first grade of a local school. During this time, she developed a passion for writing, which was taught to her by her cousin. Chloe was very artistically inclined from a young age and had a sympathetic ear for the problems of her loved ones. Meanwhile, Aubrey was growing up and preparing for school attendance. The sisters proved to be very energetic and creative personalities. In addition to other interests, they developed a growing love for art, especially drawing. The girls were very similar, close to each other, and friendly. In their opinion, Sarah was the perfect mother. She had done a lot both within the family and after the divorce to build a stable bond with her daughters. As ordered by the judge, both parents participated in special training courses in which the father also actively took part. Unfortunately, this was not enough to prevent a violent outcome to the story. According to the custody agreement reached, the girls were to spend Christmas 2017 with their father. December 21st was Sarah's birthday. They celebrated it in the morning with the children, and then Sarah brought Chloe and Aubrey to Andrew's apartment, which was located on Beach Drive. He lived just a stone's throw from the marina in an upscale area of the city overlooking the Pacific coast. However, the man was going through a rough patch at that time, specifically a financial crisis. He quit his job, lost his main source of income, and became addicted to gambling. Against this backdrop, he was unable to pay child support or feed himself and his children. From the beginning, this was a bad idea for Sarah. She didn't want to bring the girls to her ex-husband, but she was obliged to do so by court order. Otherwise, he could complain, and the decision would be revised in his favor. Above all, she didn't want to give the girls to their father over the Christmas holidays. The woman believed this shouldn't happen, but she couldn't influence the situation in any way. Sarah asked her ex-husband to let the girls stay with her because of her birthday, but he immediately threatened legal action, so she was forced to comply. At the entrance to Andrew's apartment, her anxiety grew even more. From a distance, she noticed that the lights in the windows were off. Sarah had hoped that the man might not be home and wanted to drive back with her girls. But her daughters told her that the lights in Andrew's apartment were off at all times of the day, and that this had been the case for weeks. The girls reported that during their visits to their father, they always used flashlights like when camping, and that they enjoyed it. In fact, Sarah already knew that her ex-husband had quit his job in May of that year. Against this backdrop, he had serious financial difficulties, so the electricity might simply have been turned off. She decided not to discuss this with Andrew and the girls now to avoid provoking another conflict and ruining the children's holidays. But Sarah noted in her calendar that she would address the matter later. She was looking for any opportunity to restrict the father's access to the girls, as she believed he could be dangerous for the children. The mother said goodbye to her daughters. They were to stay with their father until noon on December 25. After that, he was supposed to bring them back. When Sarah got home, she saw that Chloe had left behind her favorite stuffed animal. Her mother picked it up and brought it directly to the child. When she knocked on the window of her ex-husband's apartment, both girls appeared through the blinds in their holiday costumes. They smiled and seemed happy. The mother calmed down a bit, gave them the cuddly toy, and left, expecting to see the two girls again in a few days. On Christmas morning, Sarah woke up in an unusually empty house and began to do the usual daily tasks to pass the time until the girls returned. Throughout the day, the woman had plenty of time to clean the house, decorate, and place gifts under the tree. Sarah did her best to make the girls happy. At 2 p.m., Sarah's parents arrived. By this time, the woman was already anxious because the girls were still not back from their father, even though he was supposed to bring them by noon. She sent Andrew several text messages and called him, but he ignored all attempts. She then tried to contact his sister, but she also didn't respond to any of the calls and messages. The situation became increasingly alarming. Sarah then decided to pick up the children with her mother, leaving her father at the house in case Andrew arrived with the girls while they were away. The women drove to Andrew's apartment, but the children didn't appear. When they knocked on the window, it seemed too quiet and empty inside. The heroine of the story couldn't even begin to see what was happening behind the closed blinds. She knocked and called at the window, but no one responded, which made Sarah even more fearful. In their desperation, the women decided to speak with Andrew's neighbors. One of the neighbors said he had heard the children talking early in the morning, and around noon, he heard thuds and noises in the apartment, which hadn't initially worried him, but now seemed very suspicious. According to him, he hadn't seen any strangers around the house. Sarah's and the children's grandmother's concern multiplied, and they immediately called the police and reported the disappearance of the two little children. When the first police officer arrived at the house, he tried to reach the apartment owner, but no one responded, not even to Sarah's cries. The officer then tried turning the doorknob, and to his surprise, the door was unlocked. The light inside was off. After flipping the switch, nothing happened. It turned out that Andrew's electricity had indeed been turned off, as well as the water. He was facing eviction due to late payments for utilities. The policeman took a flashlight and illuminated a gruesome scene reminiscent of a horror movie. The walls and floor of the hallway were smeared with blood. There were splatters everywhere, even on the ceiling. In one of the rooms, the policeman found the lifeless body of a girl on a bed, whereupon he immediately called for backup. The arriving police officers inspected the eerie place with weapons drawn, as there was a possibility that the murderer who had caused the bloodbath was still in the house and could be dangerous. One of the bloody footprints led the officers to the bathroom. There they found a naked Andrew with a slashed throat and several wounds in his chest. He was still breathing, but each breath seemed heavier and heavier. In the adjacent room, Chloe was found on the bed. She was already dead. The child's body showed numerous lacerations and cuts. A bloody bat lay on her clothing. Aubrey was found not far from her sister. Like Chloe, the girl was wearing pajamas soaked in blood. Even on the ceiling of the room, there were blood splatters. Both children had multiple cuts and stab wounds, similar to those their father had suffered. The officers checked the children's pulses several times, but they were already dead. An ambulance quickly arrived at the apartment to treat the injured man. Since the bathroom was too small to accommodate the equipment, Andrew was placed on a stretcher to be carried out of the apartment. At that moment, he regained consciousness, looked at the paramedics, and simply asked them to finish him off. The victim was taken to the hospital, accompanied by police officers who wanted to question him. The officers informed Sarah that her two little girls were dead. She was restrained as she screamed hysterically and tried to force her way into the apartment. Sarah had as many questions as the investigators. How had her two little angels been brutally murdered on Christmas Day? She knew the answer. Their father had killed them. Despite his severe injuries, the man immediately became the main suspect. Sarah insisted that he posed a great danger to himself and others. Considering his condition and the nature of his wounds, the police believed they could talk to him very soon. Under such circumstances, police officers obtained truthful confessions, so the investigators wanted to speak with Andrew while he was in the hospital. They hoped to find out as quickly as possible what had happened to the children and himself. The police assumed he had massacred defenseless children, and after realizing what he had done, decided to take his own life. The children's bodies were so mutilated that the cause of death and all injuries could only be determined on the forensic table. Probably the older daughter was killed first, then the younger. Chloe was struck very hard on the head with a baseball bat, and her skull was fractured. Subsequently, the little girl was stabbed 26 times, similar to the injuries her father had suffered. Some of these injuries had been inflicted on the child before her death. The rest were added posthumously. The cause of death appears to be blood loss. Aubrey's condition was even worse. Her body showed 32 stab wounds that caused fatal bleeding. The medical examiner determined that the attacker had turned the children over at least twice to stab them from the front and back. Apparently, he was furious and wanted to ensure the girls wouldn't survive this Christmas. At the same time, forensic officers examined the victim's apartment. They found blood-soaked men's jeans and a t-shirt that belonged to Andrew. They also found a knife that was apparently the murder weapon. There was so much blood in the apartment that a special unit had to be involved in the investigation. The experts found numerous smear marks from the knife, fingerprints, and socks with a characteristic pattern. Even in the refrigerator, blood traces were found, indicating that the perpetrator had rummaged through it after the massacre. In one of the rooms, a note was found addressed to Andrew's sister. In it, he wrote a long list of frustrations with Sarah. In his opinion, he had been misunderstood by the woman he was truly in love with. He felt betrayed and also pointed to the many hardships he had experienced during his marriage and after the divorce. According to Andrew's confession, he was only happy with his children, and so he decided to leave this world with his daughters. Apparently, it was a suicide note. After examining the crime scene, the officers concluded that Andrew was the one who had attacked and brutally killed his children. The man then went into the bathroom and inflicted wounds on himself that he believed would be fatal. According to the doctors, however, none of these wounds were actually fatal. So he survived. Andrew recovered quickly and was monitored by doctors and the police until his release. Here, he admitted that he had inflicted the injuries on himself. This was heard by several nurses. Immediately after his treatment, he was arrested on charges of double murder. When Andrew was brought to the station, Sarah and her parents were already there. The police stated they were certain that the children had been massacred by their own father. All the evidence, the note, and the husband's confession pointed to it. The mother of the girls became hysterical and wept and had to be taken away from the station. The state of despair and grief of the woman is hard to imagine, for Sarah had tried everything to keep the girls away from their father. The woman had filed complaints with the Child Protection Agency and the court, but no evidence of the man's dangerousness was found, and she was not believed, and now her girls had been killed by their father's hand. The case became a highly publicized affair. Like-minded people held many memorial events to honor the memory of the innocent girls who were tormented by their own father. The public was outraged and supported Sarah. The events led to worldwide reviews of the child protection system. Even the judge who deemed Andrew suitable for fatherhood was affected. It was his decision that gave the unfit man free access to the girls and cost them their lives. However, no actions were ever taken against the judge or the Youth Welfare Office. The bodies of the victims of the senseless massacre were cremated. During the investigations, details of the complex relationship between Andrew and Sarah were uncovered. Particularly serious problems plagued the man on the financial front. In May 2017, he quit his job. Even before that, he had fallen behind on his rent and utility payments, so the utility company simply turned off his electricity. The main reason for these financial difficulties was the young father's penchant for gambling. He earned good money in his job, about $80 per shift. But during this time, he became addicted to card games. He often lost but never gave up and spent every penny to win again. However, it only got worse, and after losing, he began borrowing money from anyone who would give it to him. His addiction spiraled out of control, and Andrew began spending about $3,000 per month on gambling. As early as fall 2015, he won a large sum of $100,000 in bets. However, when he got into a frenzy trying to increase the winnings, he almost immediately lost the entire amount. To get the winnings back, the man borrowed $25,000 from a man named Paul. But he was in no hurry to repay the money because he didn't have it and continued to borrow money. In the process, he lost interest in his work and eventually quit in spring 2017. He owed about $25,000. This led to serious financial difficulties, as all credit limits were exhausted. Andrew even thought about cashing out his savings from a pension fund. The man had sunk so low that he could no longer afford groceries and asked his neighbors for food to feed his daughters while the girls were visiting him. His whole life spiraled downward and ended in a terrible tragedy. During the investigations, the police found some alarming searches in his browser history. About a month before the double murder and attempted suicide, he began actively searching the internet for the most effective method to kill himself. The situation was further exacerbated by a custody dispute. Andrew was under pressure from all sides. His problems came to a head at Christmas. That was when he made his final, horrific decision. Particularly cruel was the way he ultimately chose to commit the murder. He killed his daughters with such cold-bloodedness and brutality that serious doubts arose about whether he had ever loved them. On January 16th, the trial against the double murderer began. The prosecutor described in detail to the jury the relationship and life situation in which Andrew found himself shortly before the crime. The prosecution assumed, however, that he had voluntarily gotten himself into this situation because he was unable to overcome his addictions. His actions were clearly planned and deliberate, as everything, including his browser history, proves. The lawyer relied on an apparent inconsistency in the investigator's work. He claimed the patrol officer had left the apartment while waiting for backup, but what happened in the apartment during that time was unknown. According to him, Andrew and his children were victims of a murderer who had come to settle the man's debts. At the moment the police officer left the apartment, the real perpetrator could have escaped via the fire escape. That sounded absurd, and the prosecution dismissed the allegations. The apartment had been monitored the entire time. No signs of forced entry were found, and it was impossible for the perpetrator to sneak past the officer unnoticed from the apartment. Moreover, these claims didn't match Andrew's confession made in the hospital. In the hospital, he asked the paramedics to finish him off, meaning he had injured himself. His note indicated that he wanted to take his own life and kill the girls to keep them with him after his death. The lawyer, however, insisted that the family could have fallen victim to an outsider, a murderer who also wanted to get rid of the children he hadn't expected to find in the apartment, or they were all random victims of a madman. The fact is that on April 25, 2017, a woman was assaulted not far from Andrew's house. She was also stabbed, but the police couldn't find the attacker. The defense believed that both crimes could have been committed by the same man who was still at large. But the nature of the wounds and all the circumstances were different, and everything pointed to the defendant's guilt. As the court began to describe the crime scene in detail and present the evidence, Andrew cried. The prosecutor was convinced that the massacre of the children had been committed by their own father. Evidence included bloody sock prints on the floor. If the attacker had been an outsider, he would have worn shoes, because one only wears socks in a domestic environment. They could confirm that the fabric pattern of the socks imprinted on the blood was identical to those Andrew wore on the day of his arrest. The medical examiner also emphasized that the wounds of the man and the children were identical. Andrew admitted to wounding himself, and the children had similar cuts, meaning they were inflicted by the same person and with the same weapon. In the trial, the defense attorney didn't relent and accused Sarah of exerting moral pressure on the man, which could have triggered his aggression. The attorney tried to prove that she had significantly contributed to destabilizing his mental state. The grieving mother defended herself against these accusations, stating that the ex-husband had been aggressive for a long time, which was the reason for the divorce. She had only tried to protect the children and shield them from a dangerous, unpredictable father. That's why she had filed complaints with all authorities, but they were all ignored. Sarah had at least tried to ensure the safety of such meetings. She worried about the girls. Nevertheless, Andrew had changed a lot lately. His condition seemed to have improved, but no one realized it was all just a show. The defense attorney continued to defend the man's innocence by portraying him as a victim of circumstances. He referred to a man named Paul, to whom the protagonist owed $25,000. According to Andrew, he couldn't pay his debts and therefore had to store a suspicious bag in the apartment, the contents of which he wasn't supposed to know. At regular intervals, various people who looked like criminals picked up the bag, and they had a spare key that Andrew had provided. One of them, according to the defense, had committed the massacre in the apartment. Then the prosecution had questions for Andrew. How could he bring children into the house if criminals were constantly present there? He himself had thus created an unfavorable, dangerous environment and put the children in danger. In the trial, Andrew provided a new version of events. According to him, he spent Christmas morning with the children. They went to a local store and then played outside. After returning home, the father wanted to have a festive lunch. Suddenly, he was stabbed in the neck. According to the man, he lost consciousness from this blow, and when he came to, he found the children lifeless. The intruder was still in the apartment, but Andrew couldn't see his face because the lights were off. However, he clearly recognized that it was a dark-skinned man with dark hair. The perpetrator rushed into the kitchen and grabbed a knife, whereupon a fight ensued. Thus, Andrew received several more blows and lost consciousness again. However, during the search, neither the mysterious bag nor traces of the unknown person were found, neither DNA nor fingerprints. The prosecution was convinced that the main motive for the murder was Andrew's financial problems. He was disillusioned with life, couldn't pay his debts, couldn't provide child support for his children, and decided to kill his children to free himself from this predicament. The jury deliberated for 3 days before finding Andrew guilty of second-degree double murder. The child murderer was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 22 years. Andrew showed no emotion when the verdict was announced. The family of the murdered girls was astonished at the leniency of the sentence, but could never appeal the verdict. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.
For her 39th birthday, Terry Lamarty received a voucher from her husband for abdominal liposuction at Anthony Pignataro's clinic. When she met the doctor and entered the operating room, she immediately wanted to run away, but by then it was already too late. Anthony Pignataro was born in 1960 in Buffalo, New York. His father, Ralph Pignataro, was a renowned surgeon respected by almost everyone in the city. The Pignataro family had 2 sons, and Anthony was the younger one. After graduating from high school, he decided to follow in his father's footsteps and applied to several medical schools in the United States. However, because of his poor grades, none of them accepted him. Instead, he was admitted to a medical school in Puerto Rico, where he began his long training to become an ENT doctor. In 1978, while visiting his hometown at the age of 18, Anthony met 21-year-old Deborah at a club party. It was love at first sight, or rather, at first dance. The tall, handsome young Anthony instantly charmed the beautiful Debbie, twirling her around the dance floor to Donna Summer's hit Last Dance. After meeting at the club, Anthony and Debbie began dating. Their relationship was a long-distance one because Anthony was studying in Puerto Rico while Debbie was working in New York State. Deborah was born and raised in Williamsville, New York. Her family was not wealthy. In fact, they were constantly struggling financially. Debbie worked as a pharmacy assistant. When Anthony Pignataro graduated from medical school in Puerto Rico in 1985 and received his ENT diploma, he returned to his home state of New York. He kept his medical license and began working as a surgeon at a local hospital. Anthony's colleagues laughed at him, saying he was a complete failure in medicine, an incompetent professional who would hardly ever succeed in his career. Despite this, Dr. Pignataro was not dismissed from the hospital. That same year, 1985, Anthony and Debbie got married and moved in together. However, within the first year of their marriage, one of Debbie's friends told her that Anthony had a mistress. A devastated Debbie told her father, who advised her to forgive her husband, but only this once. Debbie listened to her father and forgave Anthony, giving him a second chance. Soon afterward, the young Pignataro family had a son, and a year later, a daughter. The family then moved into a large, spacious house in Amherst, a suburb of Buffalo, New York. There, the young doctor, Anthony Pignataro, started his own practice as a surgeon. He rented an office in a private clinic and began treating patients. By the end of 1990, 30-year-old Dr. Pignataro was already known throughout the state. He had invented a wig that was attached to the head with tiny metal pins surgically implanted directly into the skull. Anthony himself became the first customer to wear such an exclusive wig. The subject of hair loss greatly concerned Pignataro, because he himself had started losing his hair at the age of 23. For that reason, Anthony developed his own exclusive wig with attachments and officially patented it. The prosthesis was custom-made for each client. Both natural and artificial hair of various lengths and colors could be used. In addition to implanting pins for wigs, Anthony Pignataro began performing breast augmentations, facelifts, rhinoplasties, liposuction, and many other similar procedures. The cost of Pignataro's work was not high. In addition, the doctor ran special promotions and offered generous discounts so that as many people as possible would come to him. About 7 years passed. Anthony Pignataro became rich, gained popularity, and began driving through the city in a brand new red Lamborghini. At that time, none of the locals could imagine what was really going on in this famous doctor's operating room. As a mother of several children, Terry Lamarty had tried everything to lose weight after 4 births. But she simply could not get rid of the excess fat on her stomach. She exercised every day, but the fat deposits she hated just would not go away. In 1997, for her 39th birthday, Terry Lamarty received her dream gift from her beloved husband, a voucher for abdominal liposuction at Anthony Pignataro's clinic. After receiving the voucher, Terry scheduled an initial consultation with the doctor and visited his office in Amherst, New York. She liked Anthony Pignataro as a doctor. Terry felt calm and comfortable during the appointment. The doctor seemed very charismatic and friendly to her. I had absolutely no concerns or doubts about Dr. Pignataro. He reassured me and said I had nothing to be afraid of and that everything would be fine, the woman later recalled. Terry began preparing for the surgery. She had all the necessary tests done, consulted the required specialists, and gathered the needed documents. In June 1997, at 8:30 in the morning on the appointed day, her husband brought her to the clinic for liposuction. First, Terry entered Dr. Pignataro's consultation room. He examined her, asked her to take some preparatory pills, then placed her in a wheelchair and took her to the so-called operating room, which was located in the basement of the clinic. When Terry arrived there, what she found hardly looked like a sterile operating room. It was simply a basement room with a couch, a table, and a few chairs. She did not see any of the instruments normally found in operating rooms. The doctor asked Terry to sit down and wait for a while. Her tension rose. She tried to say that she had changed her mind and wanted to leave, but it was already too late. The pills had taken effect. The woman began to stutter. She lost control. Terry could not say another word. She only moaned loudly and then fell into a deep sleep. When Terry woke up, it was already 5 p.m. She was fully dressed and sitting on a sofa in the waiting room on the ground floor of the clinic. Her husband soon arrived and drove her home. As soon as Terry entered the house, she immediately saw blood running down her legs. Alarmed, she began to examine her body. When she removed her clothes, she saw a surgical incision on her abdomen about 10 centimeters long and 2 centimeters deep. The edges of the wound were not bandaged. Around the incision there were approximately 20 metal staples. When Terry saw this, she and her husband immediately called Dr. Pignataro. Anthony tried to reassure the couple, saying that the blood was only excess surgical fluid and that there was nothing to worry about. The doctor assured them that the fluid would soon drain completely and the wound would heal. He recommended that Terry lie down, rest, and come to see him the next morning. Night fell, and the pain increased with every passing hour. Terry also suffered from constant nausea and vomiting. By morning, she could no longer bear it and called an ambulance. Terry was taken to the hospital immediately. During the examination, the doctors discovered that the stitches placed by Dr. Pignataro had cut off the blood supply to her abdomen, and some tissue was already beginning to die. It also turned out that the liposuction had damaged Terry's intestines, causing the wound to become infected. The woman was no longer fighting for a beautiful figure, but for her own life. Fortunately, Terry sought help in time, and she was saved. A few days later, while Terry Lamarty was still in the hospital, she was suddenly awakened at 2:30 a.m. by Dr. Anthony Pignataro, who had secretly sneaked into the hospital. He was holding Terry's medical records and ordered her to pack her things and go home immediately. Frightened, Terry refused and began arguing with the doctor. The nurses on duty overheard their conversation and forced him to leave the hospital immediately. After this nighttime incident, Terry Lamarty remained in the hospital for several more days. She was then discharged home, but her treatment continued for many more months. Although doctors reported the incident to the health authorities, this did not stop Anthony Pignataro from continuing his practice. Just 2 months later, an even more terrible tragedy occurred at his clinic. In August 1997, Sarah Smith, a 26-year-old mother of 2, ended up on Dr. Pignataro's operating table. She had dreamed for many years of getting breast augmentation. During the operation, Sarah suffered cardiac arrest. Dr. Pignataro called an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived at the clinic, they saw Anthony trying to clear the dying Sarah's airway with a coat hanger. There was no ventilator in Pignataro's operating room. The paramedics managed to resuscitate the woman using their own equipment. However, after Sarah was taken to the hospital, she fell into a coma. After about a week in intensive care, Sarah Smith died on September 1. News of the young mother's death spread through all the media. Dr. Pignataro did not hide the fact that Sarah had stopped breathing during the breast augmentation surgery. Anthony performed CPR and administered a lidocaine injection, but it did not help. He then asked his assistant nurses to call an ambulance. The Amherst Police Department launched an investigation into the death of the young mother, Sarah Smith. When the autopsy report was released, it turned out that Sarah had died of asphyxiation. The oxygen level in her blood was so low that her heart simply stopped. The toxicology report revealed that Dr. Pignataro had mixed 2 drugs that relax the body during surgery. The dose Sarah received was so high that she could no longer breathe on her own. Following Sarah Smith's death, the New York State Department of Health suspended Dr. Anthony Pignataro's medical license. The investigation was taken over by the Erie County District Attorney's Office. As a physician, Anthony Pignataro had an excessively high opinion of himself. After opening his own plastic surgery clinic, he did not rush to hire an anesthesiologist or qualified medical staff. Instead, Dr. Pignataro worked with his wife Deborah, who had only 6 months of medical experience. The clinic also employed a young intern who was still in medical school. Anthony's wife and assistant reported that Sarah had suddenly woken up on the table during the operation and cried out in alarm. Anthony then administered an additional dose of medication, and Sarah fell asleep again. The doctor continued the operation, but Deborah soon noticed that the patient's oxygen level was dropping sharply. She informed her husband, but Anthony continued the procedure and paid no attention. After some time, Deborah noticed that Sarah's lips had turned blue, that the patient had stopped breathing, and that she had gone into cardiac arrest. Investigators interviewed colleagues and former patients of Dr. Pignataro and learned that many considered him a talentless quack. There were about 5 other patients who had suffered at the hands of this doctor. For example, 78-year-old Sophie Butrin had an experience similar to Terry Lamarty's. She developed serious complications after a tummy tuck performed by Dr. Pignataro. After the operation, Sophie felt unwell at home. She did not want to go to the hospital, but her son insisted, thereby saving his mother's life. Sophie spent about 6 weeks in the hospital. Afterward, she recovered and was discharged home to continue healing. The New York State Department of Health eventually brought 3 charges of professional misconduct against Dr. Pignataro. It turned out that Anthony Pignataro had never been licensed to perform plastic surgery. Pignataro's so-called surgical center, located in the basement, was not designed for the serious medical procedures he was performing. In January 1998, 38-year-old Anthony Pignataro was arrested and placed in a jail cell. In August of that year, he agreed to a plea deal, pleading guilty to criminally negligent homicide. Anthony Pignataro was sentenced to 6 months in prison. He also received a fine and was ordered to perform 250 hours of community service. In addition, Anthony Pignataro's medical license was revoked. Immediately after the verdict, the judge ordered Anthony to be taken into custody. A weeping Deborah Pignataro, who was present in the courtroom, did not even get the chance to say goodbye to her husband. But if Deborah had known what awaited her, she would not have shed a single tear for him. In December 1998, Anthony Pignataro was released. He returned to his wife and children. However, the man could not find work. His mother helped him. It is known that she regularly sent money to her son. At the same time, Anthony had another mistress. When his wife learned of her unemployed husband's affairs, she threw him out of the house along with all his belongings. 2 months later, Anthony returned to his wife and once again begged for forgiveness. In May 1999, 42-year-old Deborah Pignataro suddenly became ill. She began vomiting regularly and feeling pain throughout her body. The symptoms came and went. Deborah felt tingling and numbness in her arms and legs. She could not walk for long and sometimes spent the entire day in bed. At the hospital, doctors could not determine the cause of her symptoms. Deborah's condition worsened day by day. The doctors were baffled. 2 months later, in the summer of 1999, the woman could no longer walk and was dependent on a wheelchair. Deborah had partially lost her memory and did not understand what was happening to her. Anthony Pignataro told his wife that the cause of her symptoms was a diseased gallbladder that needed to be removed immediately. However, Deborah's attending physician explained that surgery was dangerous and that the woman could die on the operating table. Soon afterward, doctors performed a toxicology blood test on Deborah Pignataro and discovered that her body contained a lethal dose of arsenic. A criminal investigation was opened into Deborah Pignataro's poisoning. After examining Deborah's hair samples, investigators discovered that she had consumed approximately 30 grams of arsenic in various doses since May. In a conversation with police, Deborah recalled that her strange illness had begun after she ate a soup her husband had cooked for her. Officials suspected that Anthony had added arsenic to the soup and had been poisoning his wife regularly. Deborah gave police permission to search the house. Investigators found an ant poison containing arsenic. It soon emerged that Anthony Pignataro had used his credit card to make a purchase at a store that sold that very substance. The man was summoned to the police station for questioning. Anthony did not deny that his wife had been poisoned, but he claimed it might have been done by relatives of his patient Sarah Smith, who had died after surgery. Anthony Pignataro was initially released because there was not enough evidence to prove his guilt. At that point, Deborah was discharged from the hospital. She remained in a wheelchair and continued receiving treatment at home. Soon afterward, a man who had shared a cell with Anthony called the police. The former cellmate reported that Pignataro had told him about his mistress and that his wife Deborah had life insurance. Anthony had confessed to him that he wanted to start a new life with a new woman and would very much like to collect the insurance money. The informant also reported that Anthony had asked him whether he knew how to poison someone. Phone recordings later confirmed that Anthony had remained in contact with his former cellmate even after his release from prison. After receiving this information, Anthony Pignataro was arrested on May 11, 2000, for attempted murder. Despite the accusations, he continued to deny his involvement in poisoning his wife. But just 6 months later, at the end of 2000, Anthony Pignataro pleaded guilty. The prosecution managed to prove that he had mixed small doses of poison into his wife's food and planned to send her in for gallbladder surgery. Anthony believed Deborah would die during the operation, and then everyone would see that he was not the only doctor whose knife had killed a patient. The man wanted to regain his fame and his money. He dreamed of justifying himself for the death of Sarah Smith. Anthony Pignataro was sentenced to 15 years in prison. It is known that even behind bars he continued to fight and defend his honor, claiming that his wife Deborah had taken arsenic herself and wanted to end her own life. Deborah Pignataro underwent lengthy treatment. In an interview, she stated that she had never harmed herself. She said that Anthony had poisoned her with arsenic. After the trial, Deborah divorced her husband and obtained a restraining order prohibiting Anthony from seeing her and their children. In December 2013, Anthony Pignataro was released from prison and returned to his home state of New York, where he took a job as a food delivery driver. 1 year later, he legally changed his name to Anthony Haut, while also using the name Tony Haut publicly. When asked why he had changed his name, he replied that he did it to start a new life. In 2016, he officially opened a new business, a cosmetics company. On the company's website, Anthony introduced himself as a practicing physician, offering botanical services and selling skincare products. It turned out that this time the enterprising former doctor had developed a secret anti-aging preparation and called it the Plasma Protocol. According to Anthony, it was the first and only skincare system developed on the basis of plasma derived from one's own DNA. The address of Anthony's new business was only about a mile from his former clinic, where he had once treated patients as a plastic surgeon. Anthony's new neighbors reported that they had called the police several times after noticing packages containing surgical supplies being delivered to the man's home and after seeing various women frequently visit in the evenings. Immediately after those statements, the police turned their attention to Anthony's new activities. It is known that after the investigation, he closed his new business and moved from New York State to West Palm Beach, Florida, where his brother lived. Authorities in New York warned police in South Florida about the former fake surgeon Anthony Pignataro, calling him one of the most dangerous people they had ever encountered. In 2019, Anthony Pignataro advertised his services on a website. It is known that he later worked caring for elderly people. Anthony Pignataro is free to move around the country. Authorities in Florida have kept an eye on him, but there is no guarantee that he will not harm anyone else. Anthony's ex-wife, Deborah Pignataro, lives a secluded life. She never fully recovered from what her husband did to her. Deborah lost her health. It is known that she still suffers from reduced sensitivity and limited mobility in her limbs. She depends on outside assistance. Thanks for watching, and take care. U.S. Army veteran Maribel Ramos disappeared in the spring of 2013. She seemed to have vanished into thin air. No one knew where she was or what had happened to her. Hundreds of people searched for Maribel. Tragically, the 36-year-old woman was later found dead. Because of one crucial mistake made by the perpetrator, the case was eventually solved. Maribel Ramos was born in Mexico in 1976. In 1978, her family moved to the United States. From childhood, Maribel had a strong personality and was often the center of attention. Her father left the family, and her mother had to work 2 jobs. As the oldest daughter, Maribel helped raise her younger siblings. Ever since she was young, she dreamed of becoming rich, living a good life, and vacationing at expensive resorts. She wanted to escape the poverty she had known for years at any cost. She dreamed of a large, spacious house and a luxury car. Maribel was willing to work hard to achieve all of it. While she was still in school, Maribel decided that she wanted a future in law enforcement. At the age of 18, she started working as a security guard at a local supermarket. She knew that if she wanted to become a police officer, she would need to study hard. She also needed money, so she joined the military. In August 2001, she became a private first class. Those were not peaceful years. She took part in combat operations in Iraq, where she was later promoted to sergeant. When her tour of duty ended, she signed a new contract. Maribel served in the Army for years, and afterward she enrolled in criminal justice studies at California State University, Fullerton. At the same time, she worked while attending college. 8 years of service in the U.S. Army left their mark. Maribel suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and regularly visited a psychologist. Her studies and her new job helped distract her from dark thoughts. Maribel rented a 2-bedroom apartment in a small condominium complex in Orange, California, and she got a dog. Sadly, her mother died in 2009, and the family was devastated by the loss. 2 years later, Maribel began experiencing financial difficulties. She decided to look for someone willing to move in with her. Her ad was answered by a man who was 18 years older than she was. Kwangchol K.C. Joy, a chemist, moved from Tennessee to California. Because his name was difficult for some people to pronounce, he asked to be called simply Casey or KC. In the fall of 2011, he rented a room in Maribel's apartment and paid monthly rent. The new roommates quickly found common ground, became friends, and grew close, although both denied being in a romantic relationship. Casey was a pronounced introvert. He rarely left the house and had difficulty making new friends. Maribel often invited him to different events, including walks, dinners, and parties. In the spring of 2013, 36-year-old Maribel Ramos graduated from university, was preparing for a new chapter in life, and dreamed of a better job. She was happy, and then she suddenly disappeared. On the morning of May 30, Maribel's sister, Lucy Gonzalez, received a message from KC. He wrote that Maribel had not come home the night before and still had not returned, and that her phone was unavailable. That afternoon, Casey called the police and reported Maribel missing. He told the 911 operator that he had last seen her on the evening of May 2. According to him, Maribel had been at home, he had gone out for a walk, and when he returned an hour later, she was gone. Almost a full day had passed, and she still had not come back. At first, Maribel's family was not overly alarmed by her absence. They knew she was an independent adult woman. She had served in the military for 8 years and was capable of spending a night away from home. But when she failed to show up for her Friday evening softball game on May 3, something that had never happened before, everyone realized something was seriously wrong. The search began. Police officers went to Maribel's home along with Lucy. The rooms were empty, but the lights were on. Everything inside looked neat and orderly. Still, investigators were disturbed by the condition of the bedroom. Later, they found blood on Maribel's gray polka dot pajamas. Her phone and keys were missing, but her wallet and many personal belongings, including clothing, jewelry, and other essentials, were still inside the apartment. It did not look as though she had packed for a trip. Her car was still parked in the condominium complex. Soon afterward, Casey returned to the apartment. Once again, he said he had seen Maribel on the evening of May 2. He appeared concerned and offered to help the police. By then, Maribel's entire family, her friends, and her classmates were actively searching for her. She was well-liked, popular, and respected. Everyone knew her, everyone cared about her, and everyone wanted to find her alive and safe. Investigators found surveillance footage from cameras installed in the condominium complex. The video showed Maribel near the management office on the evening of May 2, dropping off her rent payment. She was wearing casual home clothes and appeared calm, relaxed, and in no hurry. Just a short time later, she was gone. As time passed, police questioned everyone they could in order to collect as much information as possible about the missing woman. One of the first people they spoke to was a man named Paul Lopez, with whom Maribel had recently been involved. They had met only 2 months earlier, and their relationship was still new. Paul worked for a gas company. It turned out that he was the last person known to have spoken with Maribel on the phone before she disappeared. He had called her on Thursday evening just to talk. She was at home at the time. During the conversation, she complained that her roommate had still not paid the rent. Paul could hear Casey in the background. Maribel then put the phone on speaker and told Casey to pack his things and move out by the next morning. Paul added that if Casey did not leave by then, he would come over himself and throw Casey's belongings out onto the street. The call ended shortly after that. Paul Lopez spent the entire night at work. His truck had a navigation system that allowed police to verify his movements, and records showed that he was nowhere near Maribel's apartment. During questioning, Paul admitted that he had been intimate with several other women besides Maribel. When police asked whether Maribel had also been seeing anyone else, he said he had never asked her that question. It later emerged that Maribel had indeed been dating more than one man. She had even arranged to meet a military photographer she had met online on May 5, 2013. During the investigation, police also learned that a week before her disappearance, Maribel had made a disturbing call to 911. She sounded frightened. She explained that she had argued with her roommate over unpaid rent and wanted him to move out. She admitted that she had lied about having a gun in her room because she was trying to protect herself and scare him. She said she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, that she was locked in her room, and that she was afraid for her life. She gave the man's full name as Kwang Chol Joy. Officers responded to the apartment that evening and spoke with Casey. He appeared calm and said that after they had gone out together and had drinks, Maribel became aggressive, insulted him, and threatened him. The officers listened to him and advised him to keep his phone nearby, stay in his room, and lock the door if necessary. Exactly 1 week after that incident, Maribel disappeared. Investigators searched Maribel's apartment, collected her laptop and bedding, took DNA samples from Casey, and photographed his body. Fresh scratches were visible on his hands and arms. He appeared very agitated. Casey told everyone that he loved Maribel very much, that she was his only family and his best friend, and that she had to come home. Although he and Maribel seemed close and spent a lot of time together, there were many signs that his feelings for her were much deeper than friendship. He knew her family well and had even helped her niece with math. In reality, Casey was deeply in love with Maribel, but she did not feel the same way. She thought he was too old for her. She was 36 and he was 54. He was old enough to be her father. He even underwent cosmetic surgery to look younger, reportedly spending around $12,000, but he still was not attractive to Maribel. On the evening of May 3, after calling police, Casey behaved suspiciously. At one point, officers wanted to speak with him again, but he was nowhere to be found. Later, he told them that he had been sitting in his car some distance away, watching the front door of the apartment with binoculars. He explained that he often watched crime shows and movies and simply wanted to see what would happen next. He admitted that he and Maribel had argued about rent before she disappeared. According to him, after the argument, he drove around town to cool off. When he came back an hour later, Maribel was gone. He claimed he thought somebody else had taken her. Police also found the fresh scratches on his body suspicious. When investigators asked where they came from, Casey said he often went to the park to fish. He claimed that during one recent trip he had accidentally caught a duck in some fishing line, jumped into the water to rescue it, and then injured his hands on thorny bushes when he returned to shore. The search for Maribel continued without success. Police had no clear clue where she had gone. On May 8, 2013, 5 days after her disappearance, her close friend Emily wrote a post on Yelp. Yelp is a website where people usually leave reviews about restaurants, beauty salons, and other businesses. Emily wrote about Maribel there in the hope of drawing more attention to the search. The more people who knew about the case, the better the chances of finding her. Users began responding to the post with support, encouragement, and hopes that Maribel would be found soon. A few days later, Casey left a comment under that post. He wrote, "I am Maribel's neighbor. She is my best friend and my only family. She is the best woman I have ever met. We had so much fun together. I miss her very much. She always knew I would give my life for her without hesitation." He went on to complain that police had searched the apartment, seized his computer, hard drive, phone, and car, and questioned people on his contact list. He said the entire situation was unpleasant, but that none of it mattered because he missed Maribel and was depressed and stressed. The next day, a user named Grant responded and pointed out that it was strange Casey had referred to Maribel in the past tense. Casey replied by thanking him for correcting his grammar and saying that English was his second language. He begged people not to judge him or make assumptions. A day later, Casey commented again, saying that he loved Maribel and always wished her good night. He explained that he had used a photo of the two of them as his profile picture because he missed her. He also said he felt uncomfortable that police viewed him as a suspect and that Maribel's family believed he was guilty. He added that he was suffering the most and made a shocking statement, claiming that Maribel was his sole heir and would receive $250,000 from his life insurance, as well as all of his bank savings after his death. Police began watching Casey more closely. They prepared for further questioning, tried to pressure him into confessing, and even falsely suggested they had found blood on the bed. Casey, however, continued cooperating with investigators. He answered their questions calmly, even without a lawyer present, and insisted he had nothing to hide. Detectives found nothing clearly incriminating in his apartment, on his phone, or on his computer. Eventually, surveillance teams noticed that Casey had visited the library several times and used one of the public computers there. Since police had already seized his own electronic devices, that was his only way to access the internet. Investigators decided to find out what he had been searching for in the library. They monitored his activity as he typed and clicked through websites. First, he logged into library services and checked his emails. Then he spent some time looking at job listings. After that, he opened a map of California and searched for a remote wooded area. He zoomed in closely on a particular section of land near a large tree by the road. He also searched how long it takes for a human body to decompose. When he was done, he deleted his browser history, shut down the computer, and went home. Investigators immediately went to the remote area he had searched. There, they noticed a foul odor. Not long afterward, they found the body of 36-year-old Maribel Ramos. Kwang Chol, K.C. Joy was charged with murder. When police arrested him, they found one of Maribel's military dog tags in his pocket. He pleaded not guilty. The trial began in 2014. Because Maribel's body had decomposed severely after lying outdoors in a shallow grave for around 2 weeks, the exact cause of death could not be determined. She was identified by a tattoo. There was no direct evidence proving exactly how KC killed Maribel. However, his library computer searches led police to the precise area where her body was found. Prosecutors believed that he attacked her late at night after she went to bed, covered her face with a pillow, and held it there until she died. They believed he then transported her body to a remote canyon area and buried her in a shallow grave. Investigators also believed that some of the scratches on his body were caused while disposing of the body in rough terrain. According to the prosecution, he had planned the crime carefully and took steps to avoid being caught on camera. In court, Casey continued to deny responsibility. He even claimed that the real killer had remotely hacked the library computer, opened the map, moved the cursor to the burial site, and framed him. Despite his repeated denials and endless excuses, the jury found him guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Maribel's family was devastated by the loss of their beloved daughter, sister, and friend. According to her relatives, KC was a cruel and cowardly man, and they would never be able to forgive him. Over the years, he reportedly wrote around 90 letters to the judge, each time professing his love for Maribel and insisting on his innocence. He wants to be fully acquitted. Otherwise, he may spend the rest of his life behind bars. Thanks for watching, and take care. There is a saying that only one step separates love from hate. But the heroine of today's story turned that saying upside down. In her version, only one step separated friendship from murder. Brianna Barazzini lived in Westerville, Ohio, in the United States. It was one of the quieter areas near Columbus. Like almost any other city in America, this place brought together people with very different incomes and very different views on life. Almost nothing is publicly known about the girl's family. She lived with her relatives in an ordinary neighborhood in Westerville. Brianna grew up in a calm environment, but she was always someone who could stand up for herself. As a teenager, she was relatively reserved, but whenever someone tried to provoke her, she could react quite aggressively. However, this never caused any serious problems. In her younger years, Brianna was a completely ordinary teenager. She grew up with her mother and stepfather. At 18, she graduated from high school and then started college. She always believed that higher education would help her build a better life, and naturally, her parents supported that idea. During her studies, Brianna enjoyed attending different parties. She had a circle of friends with whom she often went out. She was active and energetic, but she never tried to create problems, either in school or later. In general, she usually avoided conflict. During her school years, Brianna attended a party at the home of some friends. There, she met another girl named Halia Culbertson. They had a drink, started talking, immediately found common ground and quickly became friends. According to people close to them, they gradually grew closer and eventually became best friends. Brianna and Halia had a lot in common. Although they had known of each other before, they now spent almost every day together. Both of them loved lively gatherings, enjoyed having fun, and liked drinking alcohol. Several years passed. Brianna was nearing the end of school. Around that time, their relationship began to fall apart. They saw each other less often, met only rarely, and eventually stopped communicating altogether. Halia had grown up in the same area as Brianna. She had 4 siblings. She was athletic and had already joined a cross-country team while still in middle school. She was also very sociable and got along well with her classmates. People described her as cheerful, caring, and kind-hearted, a loyal friend who liked helping others. At the same time, she was strong-willed and determined. She did not tolerate insults or mockery from other teenagers and usually responded firmly. For a young person, the ability to stand up for yourself is important, and there was nothing particularly unusual about either girl's personality. Neither of them seemed like someone who would ever cause truly serious trouble. However, as Halia grew older, she became more rebellious. One of her friends noticed that she was becoming bolder and more aggressive, although mainly when defending herself or those around her. She was not afraid of anyone and could react harshly if someone provoked her. No one knows exactly what happened between the two girls. But after several years of friendship, Brianna and Halia suddenly began to clash. Their relationship deteriorated very quickly. Within a matter of weeks, the tension escalated, although no one suspected how badly it would all end. The girls themselves described their argument as something normal. They did not discuss the reasons for the conflict and seemed to want to keep everything within their close circle of friends. After finishing school, Brianna simply cut off contact with Halia. They wisely tried to keep their distance. The arguments even died down, but only when they did not run into each other. Whenever the former friends crossed paths by chance, it was obvious that there was still strong tension between them. These random encounters very often ended in mutual insults. Many of their friends wanted to understand the reason behind it all. Halia's brother was sometimes able to calm her down. According to him, Halia said that Brianna had accused her of dealing with and using illegal substances. It is not clear whether Halia had actually been involved in anything like that, but what mattered most was that she was furious over the accusation and could not simply ignore it. Naturally, her brother took her side. After that, Halia repeatedly spoke badly about her former friend and wrote unpleasant things to her on social media. Brianna, in turn, had no intention of apologizing because she believed she was right. But the constant pressure from her former friend began to irritate her more and more. At one point, Brianna even wrote to one of her best friends that Halia kept provoking her and that she would kill her if it did not stop. Of course, no one took those words seriously. They assumed she was simply angry because she was being mocked. Whenever arguments broke out between the girls, Brianna kept trying to push Halia away, insisting that she wanted nothing to do with her and asking only to be left alone. As the tension worsened, she even warned that things could turn violent if Halia did not calm down. This still did not seem especially alarming to those around them, because conflicts among teenagers were not unusual. Most people believed their lives would simply move in different directions and that the arguments would eventually stop. On March 26, 2023, Brianna went with one of her friends to a tobacco shop on the outskirts of town. Neither of them expected that Halia would also be there. When Brianna entered the store and saw her former friend, she became upset, but she tried to ignore her. Halia was there with her brother. She had not expected to see Brianna there either. Still, she could not stop herself from making an irritated comment. Brianna immediately responded sharply, and the situation quickly escalated into a conflict that drew the attention of the store clerk. The young employee wanted no part of the argument. The angry teenagers immediately began insulting and threatening each other, so he asked Halia and her brother to leave the store. Interestingly, the girl who had already been inside ended up being thrown out, probably because she was behaving more provocatively. Brianna, meanwhile, was allowed to stay and finish shopping. Halia did not go far. She remained outside and waited for Brianna to come out. Halia's brother immediately began filming the scene. He seemed excited when his sister said that she wanted to beat Brianna up. He appeared to expect a show, and his behavior only encouraged her further. As soon as Brianna stepped outside with her friend, Halia immediately rushed toward her, insulting her and trying to hit her. Brianna could be seen taking a defensive stance. She did not appear to be attacking. Instead, she kept asking Halia to stop. At that point, Halia was acting very aggressively. She demanded explanations, apologies, and a fight, while her brother stood there filming everything on his phone, entertaining himself and encouraging his sister. He repeatedly told Brianna not to touch Halia or he would stop filming and step in himself. It seemed as though he was ready to join the confrontation after the phone was put away so that they could beat Brianna together. Judging by what was said during the argument, the main issue was Brianna's claim that her former friend used illegal substances. Brianna tried to calm the aggressive teenager down, saying that she was acting irrationally and as if she were obsessed with the issue. Brianna's friend stood nearby and also told Halia to calm down, but Halia's brother continued to encourage aggression and provoke a fight. After the issue of drugs was mentioned again, Halia shoved Brianna several times and then punched her in the face. Brianna could no longer endure the attacks, so she reached into her bag and pulled out a knife. She did not stab Halia immediately. Instead, she held the knife out in front of her as a threat. It was clear that she meant it as a warning and wanted Halia to back away. In the final seconds of the video, it could be seen that the aggressive teenager still did not stop pushing her former friend. Halia hit Brianna in the face several more times. Brianna finally struck back, and then the video cut off. According to eyewitnesses, even that did not stop Halia. She was stabbed in the neck, but still attacked Brianna again, hitting her several more times before suddenly growing weak and collapsing onto the pavement. Witnesses immediately called 911 and reported the fight in front of the tobacco shop. Soon afterward, police officers and paramedics arrived at the scene. 17-year-old Halia Culbertson was gravely injured and bleeding heavily. She was rushed to a medical center for treatment. Brianna, who was 18 at the time, did not wait for the police and medics to arrive. Frightened, she ran home with her friend. However, it was not difficult for investigators to obtain surveillance footage from nearby businesses, along with the video recorded by the victim's brother on his cell phone. Brianna was found quickly at home. Investigators wanted to speak with her to confirm her involvement in the incident. She admitted that she had a knife, that she had pulled it out, and that she had used it. She was then taken to the police station for questioning, where the details of the tragic incident began to emerge. From the very beginning, Brianna insisted that Halia had attacked her first. She described Halia as bold and aggressive and said she had acted to protect herself and save her own life. Halia later died at the hospital because the stab wound had severed vital blood vessels. Once investigators learned that the victim had not survived, the case immediately became even more serious. In the early hours of March 27, 2023, Brianna was taken to the Franklin County Jail, where she was formally charged in connection with the killing. The prosecution took the position that she had killed her former friend in a fit of rage. Because she had no prior criminal record and was only 18 years old, her defense team immediately emphasized that she had never been known as a violent or aggressive person. The prosecution, on the other hand, stressed that she had been carrying a knife. They also suggested that it seemed suspicious that she had gone to that tobacco shop at all, because, according to them, she had not previously been known to frequent it. The defense called it a coincidence, argued that the knife was carried for self-protection, and pointed to the prolonged harassment and pressure Brianna had allegedly endured from Halia. However, there were no formal reports to law enforcement documenting any request for help before the fatal encounter. During the preliminary hearing, the court determined that Brianna could be released on bond set at $750,000. The money was paid the very next day. The judge ruled that she could remain free until trial. Her movements were not heavily restricted, although she was not allowed to leave the city. Any violation of those conditions could have made her already difficult legal situation much worse. After the autopsy, the coroner concluded that Halia Culbertson had died from a single stab wound. The blade pierced her neck and severed blood vessels, causing catastrophic bleeding. Within minutes, she lost consciousness due to blood loss. According to experts, her chances of survival would have been very low even if help had come immediately. Brianna's attorney continued to insist that she had acted in self-defense and that the stabbing was a direct reaction to her former friend's aggression. Investigators interviewed several witnesses. Halia's brother claimed that Brianna had long been provoking the conflict. According to him, Brianna had repeatedly insulted Halia, calling her a drug addict and a dealer, which he said was untrue. He argued that Halia had been deeply hurt by these accusations, especially because they had been made in front of other people. In his view, the friendship ended because of Brianna's conduct, and afterward, Brianna continued to provoke Halia both online and in real life. However, other witnesses painted a different picture. Many said that whenever the two girls met, Halia herself often escalated the situation by confronting Brianna, insulting her, accusing her, and demanding an apology. Brianna's friend, who had gone to the shop with her that night, said that the victim was the one who sought confrontation, and that this was why the violence that followed did not completely surprise her. According to her, the knife was not in Brianna's bag by pure chance. Because Halia had repeatedly tried to provoke her into fights, Brianna had begun carrying it out of fear and a desire to protect herself. The defendant's messages were then carefully examined. The prosecution focused heavily on texts in which Brianna had said that she would stab Halia if she did not calm down. Brianna denied that she had intended to kill her former friend. She claimed that Halia had repeatedly shown up wherever she was and had always been the first to start conflicts, creating something that felt to her like stalking. The situation was complicated by the fact that no one had ever gone to law enforcement beforehand. Both sides relied on video footage and witness testimony, but they interpreted the girl's behavior very differently. Even so, after reviewing the evidence, the prosecution could not deny that Halia appeared aggressive in the recordings, while Brianna seemed to be trying to avoid the confrontation. Brianna also appeared increasingly frightened, especially because of the victim's brother, who kept filming and provoking his sister to fight. His behavior clearly intensified the conflict. According to Brianna, she feared that both siblings might attack her, and that fear was what led her to pull out the knife. The prosecution criticized the use of a stabbing weapon and argued that Brianna's rage had driven the act. Brianna, however, maintained that she did not believe a stab in that area would be fatal and did not expect the blade to pierce the neck in the way that it did. From the very beginning, the defense centered its strategy on self-defense. Brianna's attorney stressed that the confrontation had not been initiated by her and that the conflict had already begun inside the store. The salesperson confirmed that as soon as Halia saw her former friend, she started cursing at her and insulting her, while Brianna appeared embarrassed and tried only to ward her off. That was why the employee threw Halia and her brother out of the store. He feared the situation would spiral out of control and turn into a fight right there inside. But once outside, Halia did not leave. She did not wait to shop. Instead, she deliberately remained outside to continue the argument when Brianna emerged. That was visible even in the video recorded by her brother. Halia waited for Brianna in order to hit her, while her brother encouraged her and suggested that it was long overdue. Several witnesses also observed Halia waiting outside. The brother's behavior was sharply condemned by many people. Some believed he had actively contributed to the attack by provoking his sister rather than calming her down. Some even felt that he should have faced consequences himself for encouraging violence. He later defended his conduct by saying that he had only been supporting his sister in a conflict she had been dealing with for a long time. The defense pointed out that Brianna repeatedly tried to stop Halia. She did not try to escalate the situation. She did not shove her first or try to strike her first. She simply kept asking Halia to stop so they could separate peacefully. According to the defense, Brianna only took out the knife once the situation had completely gotten out of control. Even then, they argued, the weapon was first used as a warning meant to frighten Halia into backing off. But that warning failed, and instead of retreating, Halia only became angrier. In court, the matter was far from simple. A fierce legal battle loomed. The prosecution relied heavily on online messages Brianna had sent to her former friend just days before the fight. In one message, she wrote that she would slit Halia's throat if she approached her again. Brianna said those words had been written in a moment of rage after yet another confrontation on the street. In another message, filled with profanity, she wrote that she would kill Halia and her entire family if they came to her house. The prosecution argued that these messages proved premeditation. The defense saw it differently. In the broader context, the attorney argued, the messages reflected fear, anger, and a pattern of harassment. According to the defense, Halia had repeatedly confronted Brianna and had even shown up near her home. Brianna later said that she had sent the second message after hearing Halia insult her while driving past her house. Once again, she described her own words as the product of anger and fear, rather than actual intent. Shortly before the murder trial was set to begin, Brianna was offered a plea agreement. The prosecution apparently concluded that proving intentional murder beyond a reasonable doubt would be difficult, especially because the issue of self-defense was likely to play a major role. On June 10, 2024, a little over a year after the tragedy, prosecutors pled legally that she plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter. For the defense, this was a major breakthrough. Instead of facing the possibility of a life sentence, Brianna now faced a far lighter penalty. The prosecution still asked the court to impose a prison term even under the deal, and the agreement also included a possible financial penalty. But from Brianna's perspective, the offer was far better than risking trial, where a jury might reject the self-defense theory entirely. On the advice of her attorney, Brianna accepted the prosecutor's offer. For her family, this brought enormous relief. For Halia Culbertson's relatives, however, it felt like an injustice. They believed the person responsible for Halia's death deserved a much harsher punishment. They argued that Brianna's threatening messages had not been taken seriously enough and described her as unstable and dangerous. Halia's mother insisted that the justice system was making a terrible mistake and feared that Brianna would one day return and seek revenge against the family. Local journalists followed the case closely as it unfolded. One of the most troubling aspects for many observers was the growing level of violence among teenagers, especially girls. Similar cases from recent years were often brought up in comparison. After Brianna accepted the plea agreement, Halia's mother and grandmother publicly expressed outrage. They believed law enforcement had betrayed Halia's memory by offering such a deal. On July 11, 2024, Brianna Barozzini, who was 20 years old at the time, was officially sentenced after accepting the plea deal. She received 3 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter. She is currently incarcerated, although she may become eligible for early release. The case drew enormous public attention. The school Halia had attended even brought in psychologists to help students process the tragedy. The details of the case were fiercely debated online. Many people questioned whether the meeting between the former friends had truly been accidental. Some wondered whether Brianna had intentionally carried the knife that night in order to settle things with Halia. Others argued that knife violence rarely appears out of nowhere. But those who supported Brianna emphasized that she had no prior criminal record, had never come to the attention of police before, and was generally described as decent, quiet, and free of addiction or serious psychological problems. Friends and relatives believed that Halia herself had contributed to the escalation by repeatedly pressuring and provoking her former friend. Even the prosecutor, who had originally pursued a much harsher outcome, ultimately acknowledged that Halia had acted aggressively and that Brianna had responded as someone who felt threatened, although in their view she went beyond lawful self-defense. A great deal of criticism also fell on Halia's brother, whose conduct was widely seen as having worsened the situation. Many people believed he could have tried to calm both girls down, but instead encouraged the confrontation. After the incident, the underage young man reportedly received hostile messages and even threats from anonymous social media accounts. The same happened to other members of Halia's family. Although they had lost a loved one, their difficulties did not end there. Even the fundraising campaign created to help with funeral costs struggled to reach its goal. Many people turned away from the family, and the donations covered only a small portion of the expenses. To many observers, that seemed profoundly unfair, especially given how much support Brianna herself continued to receive. Halia's mother and grandmother emphasized that conflicts among teenagers happen all the time, but that does not mean they should end with a stab wound to the neck and death. They wanted a harsher sentence for Brianna, but they did not succeed. The court's ruling became final. Brianna Barozzini is expected to be released after serving her 3-year sentence. According to her own statements, she wants to return to her hometown. Despite everything that happened, she still receives considerable support. She has said that she wants to continue her college education and rebuild her life. She has repeatedly asked the Culbertson family for forgiveness, said that she deeply regrets what happened, and claimed that she wants to make things right in whatever way she still can. At this point, however, the only thing left for her is to try to become a better person and to make this world in some small way a little better. Thanks for watching, and take care.